I never thought I'd end up working at Area 51. The whole concept seemed like something out of a fever dream, a place that existed more in conspiracy theories than reality. But after my discharge from the Army and a string of failed job interviews, the offer came through a friend of a friend. High pay, government benefits, and all I had to do was keep my mouth shut and follow orders. Simple enough, I thought. The first thing that struck me about the place was the silence. Not the kind of silence you find in nature, peaceful and serene, but an oppressive, suffocating quiet that seemed to swallow sound before it could fully form. Even the wind that swept across the Nevada desert seemed muted here, as if the base itself absorbed everything around it. My job was straightforward. Monitor the outer perimeter, check credentials, file reports. Standard security work. Nothing glamorous, nothing particularly dangerous. The training was minimal because, as my supervisor put it, there wasn't much to train for. Keep unauthorized people out, keep authorized people safe, and don't ask questions about what happens inside. That last part was delivered with a look that made it clear it wasn't a suggestion. The other guard were a mixed bunch. Some were veterans like me, looking for steady work and willing to overlook the strangeness of the place for a decent paycheck. Others were lifers, men and women who had been at the base for years, their faces weathered and distant, as if they'd seen things that had hollowed them out from the inside. They didn't talk much, and when they did, it was always about mundane things: sports, weather, family. Never about the work. Never about what was really going on. There was one guard, though, who stood out. Martinez. She'd been at the base for 5 years, and unlike the others, she had a spark in her eyes, a restlessness that suggested she hadn't fully resigned herself to the status quo. We bonded over late-night shift, trading stories about our time in the service, our families, the lives we'd left behind. But even Martinez had her limits. Whenever I'd steer the conversation toward the base, toward what was really happening in those underground levels, she'd shut down, her expression hardening. "Don't go looking for answers," she told me one night, her voice barely above a whisper. "The people who do don't last long here." I should have listened. It started about 3 months into my tenure. I was doing my rounds near Sector 7, a restricted area that I'd been told was off-limits to all but the highest clearance personnel. The corridor leading to it was always empty, the heavy steel doors sealed tight. But that night, as I passed by, I noticed one of the doors was slightly ajar. Just a crack, but enough to let a thin sliver of light spill into the hallway. Curiosity got the better of me. I approached slowly, my hand instinctively moving to the pistol in my hip. As I drew closer, I heard voices. 2 men speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I couldn't make out everything, but certain words cut through the murmur. Specimen, containment breach, protocol alpha. My heart began to race. I knew I should walk away, report the open door, and move on. But something compelled me to lean in, to try to hear more. That's when the door swung open, and I found myself face to face with Dr. Reeves, one of the senior scientists at the base. He was a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and a perpetually worried expression. When he saw me, his face went pale, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice that was barely audible, he said, "You shouldn't be here." Before I could respond, he pulled the door shut, the lock clicking with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing, before turning and continuing my patrol. But the encounter stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. The next day, I tried to find Dr. Reeves to ask him what he'd meant, but he was nowhere to be found. When I asked about him, I was told he'd been reassigned. Just like that. No explanation, no forwarding information. It was as if he'd never existed. That's when I started paying closer attention. I began to notice patterns, small inconsistencies that I'd overlooked before. Certain sections of the base would be sealed off without explanation. Personnel would disappear, their names scrubbed from the duty rosters. And there were sounds, faint and distant, emanating from the lower levels. Mechanical hums, sometimes punctuated by what sounded like screams, though they were so distorted I couldn't be sure. Martinez noticed a change in me. "You're asking too many questions," she said one evening, her tone warning. "People who do that here don't last." What are they hiding? I asked, unable to contain my frustration. What's down there? She looked at me for a long moment, her expression a mixture of pity and fear. I don't know, she said finally, and I don't want to know. Neither should you. But I couldn't let it go. The more I tried to ignore it, the more the mystery consumed me. I started digging through files, looking for anything that might give me a clue. Most of it was bureaucratic nonsense, procurement orders, and maintenance logs. But then I found something, a reference to Project Lazarus, a program that had been active for the past 15 years. The file was heavily redacted, but what little I could read suggested it involved biological research, something to do with extraterrestrial organisms. Extraterrestrial. The word sent a jolt through me. I'd always dismissed the alien stories as nonsense, the product of overactive imaginations. But here it was, in black and white, buried in a classified file that I had no business reading. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know if it was real. The opportunity came during a night shift. There was a power surge, something that happened occasionally. Due to the base's aging infrastructure, the backup generators kicked in, but for a few minutes, the security systems were down. It was a small window, but it was all I needed. I made my way to the lower levels, using the access codes I'd memorized from watching other personnel. My heart pounded in my chest as I descended the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The lower levels were a maze of corridors and locked doors, all identical and disorienting. But I pressed on, following the faint hum that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Finally, I reached a door marked Lab 7C. It was sealed with a biometric lock, but the power surge had disabled it. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, filled with rows of glass tanks, each one connected to a web of tubes and wires. Inside the tanks were things. I couldn't bring myself to call them creatures, though that's what they were. Some were small, barely larger than a human hand, with translucent skin and too many limbs. Others were larger, grotesque amalgamations of flesh and metal, their bodies twitching with unnatural life. But it was the last tank that made my blood run cold. Inside was something that looked almost human. Almost. Its skin was gray and smooth, its eyes large and black, staring at nothing. It floated in the viscous liquid, suspended in a state that could have been sleep or death. I couldn't tell. I stepped closer, my breath fogging the glass. As I stared at it, the creature's eyes suddenly snapped to mine. I stumbled back, my heart racing, as it pressed its hands against the glass, its mouth opening in a silent scream. That's when the alarms went off. I ran. I didn't think, didn't plan, just bolted for the exit. Behind me, I could hear footsteps, voices shouting orders. The lights flickered, plunging the corridor into darkness, and I collided with something solid. I hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of me. When the lights came back on, my supervisor was standing over me, his expression cold and unreadable. "You've made a very serious mistake," he said. Before I could react, hands grabbed me from behind, yanking me to my feet. Security personnel swarmed the corridor, their weapons drawn, their faces hidden behind visors. My supervisor appeared, his expression cold and furious. "You've seen too much," he said simply. They didn't take me to an interrogation room. Instead, they dragged me back toward the lab. And that's when I realized with horror what they intended to do. I fought against their grip, screaming, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the base. In the chaos, I managed to break free. I didn't think, just ran, sprinting through the maze of corridors as alarms blared around me. Behind me, I could hear shouting, the pounding of boots, and something else, a metallic scraping sound that sent ice through my veins. I burst through an emergency exit and found myself in the vast Nevada desert, the cold night air hitting my lungs like a punch. The base lit up behind me, floodlights snapping on, bathing the landscape in harsh white light. I had to run, had to get away, but I needed proof. As I fled, I grabbed files from an outdoor storage unit near the fence, stuffing papers into my jacket, anything that might document what I'd seen. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold them. I reached the perimeter fence and squeezed through a gap where the ground dipped, the barbed wire tearing at my uniform and skin. On the other side, I ran toward the dark shapes of mountains in the distance. Behind me, I heard helicopters taking off, their searchlights beginning to sweep the desert. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, but I pushed forward. I could see lights in the distance, a small town, maybe 10 miles away. If I could just reach it, find someone to help, someone to take the documents and expose the truth. But then I felt it. That same presence I'd sensed in the lab. A cold, malevolent awareness pressing down on me. The air around me grew frigid, and I knew with absolute certainty that something was out there in the darkness, hunting me. I stumbled behind a cluster of rocks, gasping for breath, as a helicopter passed overhead, its searchlight missing me by mere feet. The sound of rotor blades faded, but the presence grew stronger. I could almost hear whispers at the edge of my consciousness, telling me to stop, to give in, to let it find me. Ahead, I spotted an old maintenance shack, half buried in sand and forgotten. I staggered toward it and threw myself inside, pulling the rusted door closed. The interior was filled with dust and decay, but it offered a moment's shelter. I pulled out the files, my hands trembling in the dim moonlight filtering through cracks in the walls. Pages of reports, diagrams of the creatures, photographs that made my stomach turn. This was it, the proof the world needed to see. But then I heard footsteps outside. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that didn't sound quite human. The door creaked, and I knew my time was running out. I shoved the files back into my jacket and squeezed through a broken window at the back of the shack. The desert stretched before me, and in the distance, I could see the town lights more clearly now. They were so close. If I could just make it. I ran with everything I'd left, my vision blurring with exhaustion and fear. The helicopters were circling back, their searchlights converging on my position. Behind me, I could hear breathing, hot, fetid breath that shouldn't exist, getting closer with every second. The presence was no longer just in my mind. It was real, physical, hunting me through the darkness. I could feel its hunger, its rage of being discovered. Every instinct screamed that death was right behind me. The town was so close now. Just a few more minutes. I could see a figure at the edge of town, waving, calling out to me. Hope surged through my chest, giving me a final burst of energy. "Over here," the voice called. "Hurry." I pushed harder, ignoring the agony in my legs, the fire in my lungs. The documents pressed against my chest, proof of everything, evidence that could change the world. I just had to make it, just a little further. But then something cold and sharp wrapped around my ankle, yanking me off my feet with brutal force. I crashed to the ground, the files scattering across the dirt. I scrambled forward, reaching desperately for the papers, but another appendage grabbed my leg, dragging me backward. I twisted around and saw it, the creature from the tank, but changed, twisted, more monstrous than before. Its gray skin seemed to absorb the moonlight, its black eyes reflecting nothing as they fixed on me. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. I tried to scream, but terror had stolen my voice. I clawed at the ground, my fingers digging into the sand and rock, but its grip was too strong. The figure from the town was still there, still calling, but they felt a million miles away now. My last coherent thought was of the files scattered on the desert floor, visible in the moonlight. The evidence was there, exposed to the world. Maybe someone would find it. Maybe the truth would finally come out. The creature loomed over me, its breath washing over my face like a wave of decay. I could feel its presence invading my mind, tearing through my thoughts, and I knew this was the end. I looked one last time at the documents lying in the dirt, at the town in the distance, at the promise of salvation that I'd never reach. The helicopters were closing in, their lights illuminating the scene, but they were too late. The creature's grip tightened, pulling me closer to its grotesque form. I could feel its thoughts pressing into mine, alien and incomprehensible, filled with rage and hunger. My vision began to blur, the edges darkening as consciousness slipped away. The pain was overwhelming, but beneath it was something worse, the terrible understanding that I had failed. The figure from the town was running toward me now. I could hear their footsteps pounding against the hard desert floor. "Hold on," they shouted, but their voice sounded distant, as if coming from underwater. The creature paused, its black eyes shifting toward the approaching person. For a moment, I felt its attention waver, its grip loosening just slightly. It was enough. With the last reserves of strength I didn't know I had, I kicked out, my boot connecting with something soft and yielding. The creature recoiled with a shriek that split the night air, a sound so inhuman it made my ears ring. I crawled forward, my fingers closing around one of the scattered documents, a photograph of the creature in its tank, undeniable proof. My hand was slick with blood, leaving crimson smears across the paper, but I held on to it. The helicopters were directly overhead now, their searchlights turning night into day. I could see uniformed figures rappelling down, weapons raised. But they weren't aiming at the creature. They were aiming at everything. At me, at the documents, at the person still running toward me from the town. "Stop right there," a voice boomed through a megaphone. "This is a restricted military operation." The creature let out another shriek and lunged at me again, but this time gunfire erupted from above. Bullets tore through the air, some hitting the creature, others kicking up plumes of sand around me. The creature writhed and twisted, its movements becoming more frantic, more desperate. I tried to stand, to run, but my legs wouldn't support me. The person from the town reached me, grabbing my arm. It was a woman, middle-aged, with terrified eyes. "Come on," she screamed, trying to pull me to my feet. But the soldiers were already surrounding us, their weapons trained on us both. The creature was thrashing nearby, wounded but not dead, its screams filling the air with an otherworldly sound that would haunt anyone who heard it. "The documents," I gasped, pressing the blood-stained photograph into the woman's hand. "Take them. Tell everyone. Make them see." A boot came down on my wrist, and I cried out in pain. My supervisor's face appeared above me, his expression colder than I'd ever seen it. "Secure the area," he ordered. "Retrieve all documents. No weaknesses." "No," the woman screamed, backing away with the photograph clutched to her chest. "People need to know. They need to." A shot rang out. The woman crumpled to the ground, the photograph slipping from her fingers and fluttering away in the desert wind. I watched in horror as it tumbled across the sand, disappearing into the darkness beyond the searchlight's reach. My supervisor knelt beside me, his voice low and almost regretful. "I tried to warn you," he said. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried." The creature had gone silent now, either dead or sedated. Soldiers were gathering the scattered documents, placing them in sealed bags. Others were moving toward where the photograph had blown away, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I could feel my strength fading, the world growing dimmer. But through the haze of pain and despair, I clung to one small hope. That photograph, carried away by the wind, might escape them, might be found by someone who would ask questions, someone who wouldn't stop until the truth came out. My supervisor stood, speaking into his radio. "Clean sweep. No survivors. Sanitize the area." The last thing I heard was the sound of the wind, carrying secrets across the desert. The last thing I felt was the cold Nevada sand against my cheek. The last thing I thought was that maybe, just maybe, one photograph would be enough. And then there was nothing.